unfortunately, the health and safety executive basically said that for any people working from home temporarily, they didn't need to have a risk assessment because they assumed we were only going to be working from home for however long, a couple of months. And then, of course, here we are almost a year later, still working from home. So I think it was in September of 2020 where they actually changed the guidance. And they said that for anyone working from home, whether permanently or temporarily, employers have a duty of care to ensure that they assess the risks of their home workstation setup. They review it if it's no longer deemed valid. So if there's been a change to any circumstances, such as working from a different environment, and that they mitigate any of those risks that the assessment might have found, and that they also ensure that their workstation complies to the minimum requirements. So that's really where most people are at the minute in terms of what employers should be doing for their employees. But there is also another law that is quite important to consider at the minute, and that relates to the, and let me just find how it's actually worded. Bear with me, I did have it a second ago.
No stress. Legislation. It's so
Yeah,
wordy.
it's very wordy. There we go. The Furniture and Furnishings Fire Safety Regulations of 1988. And essentially, what that means is that, let's say a lot of people have gone into the offices and they have brought their chair home to work from home mat, they may not comply to the domestic fire regs that those fire safety regulations actually dictate. Sitting on a dining room chair, using a laptop without the equipment that I'll talk about in a second, potentially hunching over that dining room table whilst they're typing, and potentially even that your feet not touching the ground when you are sitting and working. And the reason that a dining room table can be a bit of an issue is because most dining room tables are higher than a standard desk height. If you think back to, people weren't designed to work on computers at a dining room table, they were designed to eat. So the higher the table is, the closer the food is to your mouth, the less chance there is of you making a mess. But obviously a workstation is a little bit lower. So it's quite likely that people are shrugging their shoulders whilst they're working from home, sitting at a dining room table. Chairs, dining room chairs, they're not adjustable. They're most often static, they're wooden, they're a bit uncomfortable, and most likely the backrest is too far away from the person whilst they're sitting and working. And sadly, what that can do is result in a lot of compression of the spinal column. And so that can result in a lot of tension, a lot of pressure, and a lot of discomfort. And so that can then encourage you to lean further forward. And I wanted to show you a quick slide. Now let's see if this works as well as it did a minute ago. So this slide shows that poor postures can increase pressure down through the spinal column. If you look at the area there that's highlighted in yellow where someone is standing, we can say that this is 100% relative pressure going down through the spine. But if you have a look at the column to the right that shows someone in a sitting position, you can see that the pressure down through the lower back actually increases by something like 140%, so or 40% in comparison to standing. And then if you move even further forward to that forward posture that is so common with people working from home, you've got an increase of, and unfortunately I'm going to have to move you across so I can see it, 275%. So that's an increase of 175% in comparison to standing. Okay, so a lot of pressure can go down through the spinal column that can result in aches and pains when people are working from home. The top of the screen should be in line with your horizontal eye level. And that's because most people's line of sight is about 15 to 20 degrees below the horizon. So by positioning the top of the screen in line with your eye level, your line of sight should fall ideally in the center of the screen. So that should help prevent your neck or head having to do any awkward movements to focus on the work you're doing. But of course, a laptop, it's far too low. So you're most likely going to be craning your head and neck further forward, increasing that pressure down through the spine and encouraging aches and pains. Now, these are temporary solutions. So I would always suggest that more permanent solutions will be put in place afterwards. But these are things that people can do working from home, hopefully with things that they've got lying around the house. So first of all, let's say the chair height is too low. You could simply get a cushion or a pillow, put it on the dining room chair and raise your hips to be just a little bit higher in relation to your knees. So we want our hips higher than our knees to try and maintain the most neutral position of the pelvis. Let's say you're sitting on that dining room table and your knees are maybe higher than your hips. Those of you that are sitting on a sofa, you're probably thinking that's exactly me right now. My knees are definitely higher than my hips. What that can encourage is your pelvis to rotate backwards, so it can have that effect of posterior rotation. And in essence, that can actually pull on the inward curve of the lumbar spine. Now, the spinal column should be that S shape, so we want to maintain those curves of the spine. And with that flattening of the inward curve, can encourage more rounded postures. So we always want hips higher than knees to try and keep that S shape of the spine. So sitting on a cushion or a pillow can help. If you do that and then your feet then come off of the floor, which is quite common, unfortunately, use a box or a book or a ream of paper as a makeshift footrest. Despite working for quite a big ergonomic company for the past 7 years, I actually used to use a Next directory as my footrest for however long, and it worked. It did the job. It provided me with contact underfoot. We need contact underfoot to try and encourage us to lean back into the chair. So our head is the heaviest part of the body, and we don't want our spine to have to take that load. We don't want it to take that weight. So we want to relax back into a chair to ensure that the weight of the head is transferred into the structure of the chair rather than compressing the discs in the spine. Having good, suitable foot contact can help to encourage that slightly reclined, relaxed posture. Third thing, that you could do is actually put the laptop on a number of boxes or books. I have seen someone working from home who used an upturned mixing bowl as a means to raise the height of their laptop. I wouldn't comment on the stability of that, but it served a purpose for the time being. But as I mentioned before, we want the top of the screen in line with your eye level, so raising it on books can do that. However, to do that suitably, you really do need to get an external keyboard and an external mouse to plug into the laptop. Otherwise, you'll start typing like this, which your arms are very heavy, surprisingly, and you don't want to have to lift them away from you. You want to keep them relaxed by your sides with your elbows at a 90-degree bend, because that's the most efficient position for the muscles surrounding the upper limbs to reduce the risk of injury. So putting the laptop on a box or something to raise it up with a plug-in keyboard and mouse, that can help to essentially replicate a desktop PC. And they would be the main tips that I would suggest. However, you could also consider using a cushion at your lower back as well, or even a rolled up towel. Doing all these back-to-back Zoom calls at the minute. And of course, that can have a number of issues. Eye stress, visual fatigue. When we're looking at screens, our eyes don't blink as much as they would do if you're not looking at a screen, so that can result in dry eyes, which can have a knock-on effect to headaches, things like that. So something I have been suggesting is when you are on Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is, consider keeping your camera off. And the reason being is that, but I will talk about a reverse of that in a second. The reason being is it can give you a bit of a visual break. So let's say I didn't feel like I needed to look at this screen. I could still be partaking in the meeting, but looking at something in the distance, and I'm not staring at this screen. So the effects of blue light that's not having, hopefully, a negative effect on my eyes. But there's something called the 20-20-20 rule. And that, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but that relates to, for every 20 minutes of screen-based activity, you should look at something that's 20 feet in the distance and hold that gaze for 20 seconds. And the reason being, when you are looking at this middle distance, the muscles surrounding the eyes have to contract. And so that can be quite fatiguing. So if you can look at something in the distance, the muscles surrounding the eyes get a chance to relax. And it's thought that you have to look at something for 20 seconds for those muscles to relax. So 20-20-20 rule is a really good one to remember. So if you can consider turning the camera off, that can help with that visual break. But it could also help with a movement break,